We put on masks.
We put them on to fit in. We put them on to gain approval. We put them on to avoid judgment. And all of that is at the cost of hiding our true selves. What are the situations where you tend to find yourself masking up? Are you doing it for protection? Are you doing it for self-preservation? Are you doing it to feel safe? Are you doing it to avoid judgment? Are you doing it because you want to be liked? There's 1,000 reasons why you are putting on your masks. Welcome back to Unapologetic Rabble-Rousers. I'm DocShellie.
And I'm Carla Lewis. And we are carrying on down the path we've been following. And today's episode is about the masks we wear. So we're picking up on this notion of authenticity and being able to just be true to ourselves and not be performing to satisfy others. And we'll get into more about that. So what Shelley and I have been talking about is, for this episode anyway, is to look at this notion of wearing masks. And I have to tell you, when we were warming up the technology for the first one in this series, we actually came up with this idea about masks because Shelley was having a little bit of technical fun and found those places where you can put, well, we had pig ears and a pig nose, and then we had a hat and the Hamburglar glasses and all of that. But the notion is that we put on masks, and we want to explore something about that.
Yes, indeed. And obviously we're talking about metaphorical masks here, but we put them on. We put them on to fit in. We put them on to gain approval. We put them on to avoid judgment. And all of that is at the cost of hiding our true selves. It's like the mask can literally feel like a shield that protects us. So it's a totally natural thing to do. We have to recognize it if you're doing it too often, if you're doing it for your own, so you're the detriment of who you are. Because masks can protect us, right? They can protect us from rejection and criticism and all that stuff. But they can also disconnect us from ourselves and who we actually are.
If we think about masks in a number of ways, certainly from a costume point of view, where we are consciously trying to be somebody else or something else. And so there's an understanding under those circumstances where a costume is a part of the environment for even just a short period of time. Mask isn't even serving a protection thing, except that it's trying to hide your identity. But that's what's supposed to be happening in this particular situation. We have masks that, think about sports figures. In most sports, there's somebody who is going to be wearing a mask. The football helmets, the catcher's mask, the fact that they serve a purpose of protection, but it's actually keeping them safe. And I think that's where this notion of personal masks starts coming into play. It's about safety, but it's safety from other than people's heads coming at you or balls coming at your face or hockey pucks or whatever it might be. It's like a cocoon. It creates this cocoon. And you're safe inside of that. And that's what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So being able to consider what masks we put on and when. We talked last time about triggers when we may go into people-pleasing mode. Mm-hmm. When we are putting on these masks, it's rare that we're putting on the same mask every time we put a mask on. There are circumstances that we develop. This is the mask for this set of circumstances. And there's something you set up with that, which is a real need for you to keep your masks straight. If what you put on is different given the circumstances, it's like, how many lies can you tell? And how do you keep them all straight so that you're consistent? Because we already know what happens when you show up differently than others expect.
funny. I like that analogy. I think, like, when I think about masks, it's funny because something's percolating in my brain here. How we've talked about perfectionism before. And I don't know that I've ever, I'm sure somewhere I've connected it, but that's a mask
Mhm.
trying to seem flawless at all times. And I don't think I ever really thought about that being a mask that we wear versus I just want stuff to be right. So it's kind of interesting. But when you are really truly trying to be flawless all the time, that's a mask because we're human beings and we're infallible.
And it also keeps you stuck.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
whole, we've spent quite a bit of time in across a number of episodes addressing that notion of perfectionism. And it's like being perfect in someone else's eyes, or is it about being perfect in your own? I think it might be a little bit of both. But at the end of the day, perfectionism is about not being able to find fault.
Yeah. And I think there's a connection to vulnerability too, because
Yes.
that is something that I have spent many, many years not being good at. And with that came that perfectionism. I have to be perfect because if I'm not perfect, then I'm vulnerable and I don't want to be vulnerable because
Okay.
that's big and scary.
It is big and scary.
And I think of other common types of masks like caretakers. And I don't literally mean like I have a person I have to take care of, but caretakers who always put everyone else's needs above their own. Women in general tend to do that. Mothers, I can't tell you how many women I have heard. Well, I have I come last because I have to take care of my kids and I have to take care of my husband and I got to take care of the animals. But if you're not taking care of you, you can't take care of all those other people without burning yourself out.
And there's so much coming out now about caring for the caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
And people are recognizing the tremendous toll that takes. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're in a position where somebody else is dependent on you, I don't mean I don't mean necessarily psychologically dependent, but physically dependent on you. I mean, they're dealing with their own stuff for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this thing that, okay, I am not in that person's position. I'm in a position to be able to assist. And who am I to say no to that? Who am I to say no? And then it keeps going and going and going. And there's a tiredness, there's an
Mm-hmm.
exhaustion that sets in. And yet it's not something that's going to stop just because you want it to.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that sense of responsibility and all that that just ramps up. And so caregivers are, especially those who are in the home, not paid,
Mm-hmm.
family members, friends who rise to the occasion, and those that do so as a village, where you have a group of people who have accepted the responsibility to be there for somebody. There's something beautiful about that. But for the individual caregiver who's on their own, wow, they have to be strong all
Yeah.
the time, even when they're not.
It's interesting when you said rise to the occasion, I had this little shiver that went down my spine because I thought, how, first of all, how much pressure is that? Rise to the occasion. And then it's almost glorified. I rose to the occasion and you didn't. So it just kind of, it was an interesting turn of a phrase for me.
Okay.
And also, I'm thinking about a friend of mine years ago was a caretaker for her mother and as she was aging and she lost a lot of friends because she just out of guilt, out of pressure, out of love, out of partially wanting to do it, just like all of a sudden dedicated her entire life to taking care of her mother. She never wanted to leave her mother alone. Her mother was she could have been left alone for a while. She wasn't going to burn the house down or anything.
Mm.
But it was like she 24/7 felt like she just needed to be right there next to her mother. And she completely neglected the rest of her life. And this went on for maybe 5 or 6 years. And then all of a sudden, after her mother passed away, she was trying to reconnect with people. And they were like, you turned into a fair weather friend. I don't want anything to do with you.
Hmm.
And so she really struggled because what were her priorities in taking care of herself, going to the gym, engaging with friends? She just didn't do any of it. She gained weight. She lost friends. She got divorced. So it was like that extreme of rising to the occasion darn near took her out.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't really recognize any of it. A few of us kept trying to tell her, you still have to take care of yourself. You can't be the best caretaker for your mom 24/7. That is not your job. And her husband was like, we can hire somebody. Like, we can bring somebody into the house to babysit her if you really don't want to leave, but you've got to get out of this house. She wouldn't hear it. She's like, she's my mother. It's my responsibility. And people were like, when you were a child growing up, your mother still had a life. She did things. She wasn't with you 24/7, but she just didn't hear it. And it was really interesting to watch her go through this process of trying to reconnect, trying to figure out now who is she? Because for the past 5 or 6 years, all she was associated with was taking care of this person.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. And it's an extreme example, but how many times we find ourselves in potentially temporary situations where we do have to make choices,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's
Yes.
caretaking choices, whether it's people pleasing choices. I mean, everything in life is a choice. And sometimes we feel like we don't have a choice. And she felt like she didn't have a choice.
So you think about
She
that.
did.
If you find yourself in a situation where it feels like you don't have a choice,
You always have a choice. Always.
yes, you always do. And what is it? Our masks actually prevent ourselves
Hmm.
from addressing what's really going on. I don't even want to think about, I'm imagining this woman. I can't even think about not being here because of whatever, but I can't think about it. It's absolutely what I have to do.
Hmm.
And I can't have help and I can't have a life. And so, how many times, even in smaller ways, do we make those same kinds of decisions,
Right.
walk those same kinds of paths to say, no, look, I just can't. I can't. We've talked about it before. You talk about it. That's a story you're telling yourself.
Yep. Yeah. Our stories can be incredibly powerful. Even the stories that we flat out make up in our heads that are full of lies can be really powerful. And we just go, yeah, that's the story.
And it becomes your truth.
Hmm. Yes.
So I,
Yes.
I want to bring back that wisdom you had shared in an episode where we talked about the stories, and that when you say never or always
Always.
or can't,
Hmm.
that those are stories.
Hmm.
And when you hear yourself thinking that or saying that, that it's important to be able to take time and look, okay, where's that coming from? How true is that?
Yeah.
That never or that always or I can't. And what kind of reflections? I know that this is going to end up being a journaling opportunity as well, but for your friend who went through all of that, what was missing for her that she couldn't even take that moment to reflect on what her husband and her friends were trying to share and encourage? What questions was she afraid to ask herself?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think some of it is that mask of I'm the perfect caretaker. I'm the perfect daughter. I'm the one. And I think a lot of that was just hiding behind that mask. And I don't know, like masks don't really come out of nowhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere along the line, That was her conditioning or her belief that that's how she shows up. I don't
An-
know.
Another thing that comes to mind is that by taking that stance, look at me.
Hmm.
Look at how I am the one. I am doing everything.
Hmm.
I am that person. I'm a rock. I'm a really good person because I'm giving up everything to be able to take care of the woman who gave me life.
And I think the problem then is because this went on for years. So the longer we wear the mask, the harder it is to take it off.
Hmm.
And the more ingrained we get into that story that's driving why we're wearing that mask. And I think at some point, and she's a prime example of it, she starts to forget who she really is underneath that mask.
Hmm. Yeah.
You know, because she was a good friend, she's a good human being, she was a good worker, she quit her job, she's like all these things, and she just 100% became, I take care of my mom without anything else.
So that rewriting of the identity, at least for the situation.
Yeah.
As individuals, we go through a day, and I'm just sitting here thinking about what are my triggers? Not so much triggers that the mask comes on, but what are my tells that I'm about to put one on? And I'm just thinking, not that these are, I'm making these up, I think.
Hmm.
But when you get a phone call and you see who's calling, and you get this, do I want to take this or not? When are those, what are those tells that we might have that say, yeah, I'm about to enter into a place where I need to put a mask on. It
Mhm.
might be that phone call. It might be looking at your calendar and seeing that you've got a meeting with somebody that the last thing you want is to hear their voice.
Mhm.
What are some of the things our body tells us? I
The,
think our
the
if we
body
pay it,
knows.
yeah, I think our body gives us indications and we just buy into it and say, yep, okay, here I go. Let me grab that one off the hook so that I can put that one on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where are we? How aware could we be about those times when, yep, here it comes. Here it comes. I see it happening.
Yeah. I think it has to start, you have to have the awareness, right? You have to know, to your point, you've got to know those triggers. What is triggering me to put on my mask and how can I start to take it off? You have to know the triggers. You have to know when the situation, what are the situations where you tend to find yourself masking up? Are you doing it for protection? Are you doing it for self preservation? Are you doing it to feel safe? Are you doing it to avoid judgment? Are you doing it because you want to be liked? There's 1,000 reasons why you're putting on your masks. You have got to figure out for yourself, when am I doing this? Why am I doing this? When do you feel the need to hide or to perform? Because it can go, that mask can go either way, right?
Mm-hmm.
For those that the funny people, they feel the need to perform sometimes. And that could be a mask.
Mm-hmm.
Some people want to shirk away and hide in the corner. That could be a mask. Knowing those triggers can really help you start to understand when you're using the masks and how you can start to take them off a little bit. And taking them off, removing those masks requires vulnerability, which scares the crap out of some people.
Being able to know that this is when I'm going to put it on means there's another question, and that's why. Why this mask
Mm-hmm.
in this situation? What what is it serving? How is it serving me?
Mm-hmm. And how is it not serving you?
And how would things be if I just sort of left it off this time?
Mm-hmm.
Guess I'll never know unless I try.
Yeah, try.
So give
Being
it,
real is more important than being perfect, as I think about the perfectionism that is seems to be facing the world these days. Being real is more important than being perfect. And I think if you find that there's certain people that cause you to put on your mask, maybe you need to choose some different relationships. Choose relationships where you can show up and be your authentic self, and people will love you through it.
What a great way. What a great way to wrap up an episode about masks. The masks we wear.
And taking off the mask, it takes courage to do it, but it's worth it. It is so worth it.
I'm Carla Lewis.
I'm DocShellie. Thanks for tuning in. We are going to continue this theme for a couple more arcs here. And let us know what you think. Let us know how you're doing with your mask removal. Give us a share, give us a like. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
The longer we wear the mask, the harder it is to take it off. And the more ingrained we get into that story that's driving why we're wearing that mask. Being real is more important than being perfect.